Windsor, Prince Philip has been interred in the Royal Vault at St. George's Chapel alongside the remains of 24 other royals, including 3 kings of England. But it will likely not be his permanent resting place. The biggest of 7 interment sites inside the chapel, the vault houses the remains of King George IE, whose almost 6-decade reign included the years of the American Revolution. His sons King George Ave and King William Ave are also buried there. The vault has also been the temporary resting place for almost 30 royals, including Philip's mother, Princess Andrew of Greece. Her remains were transferred to the convent on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, where they now lie near her aunt, Grand Duchess Serge of Russia. King George V, the father of Queen Elizabeth I, was interred in the royal vault for 17 years before his remains were moved to the King George V Memorial Chapel at St. George's in 1969. His wife, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and daughter Princess Margaret were interred alongside him after they died in 2002. After the death of Queen Elizabeth I, she and Philip are expected to be buried in the royal burial ground on the Frogmore estate close to Windsor Castle. Queen Elizabeth I is sitting alone in the choir of St. George's Chapel during the funeral of Prince Philip, the man who had been by her side for 73 years. Following strict social distancing rules during the pandemic, the Queen set an example even in grief, sitting apart from family members arrayed around the church. Just 30 mourners are allowed to attend the service at St. George's on the grounds of Windsor Castle, where the Queen has shielded from COVID-19. Other royals who are in family bubbles are sitting together. The service began with Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby entering the chapel ahead of the coffin, followed by Philip's children and 3 of his 8 grandchildren, as a 4-member choir sang "I Am the Resurrection and the Life." Earlier, people across Britain have observed 1 minute of silence in honor of the late Prince Philip just before his royal ceremonial funeral got underway inside St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. Members of the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards placed the coffin of Britain's Prince Philip onto a modified Jaguar Land Rover in the quadrangle at Windsor Castle in Windsor, England. EP Photo Philip, who was consort to Queen Elizabeth I for 73 years, died April 9, just 2 months shy of his 100th birthday. His coffin, draped in his personal standard and topped with a wreath of flowers and his naval cap and sword, have arrived at St. George's Chapel inside Windsor Castle. The Queen and senior royals accompanied the coffin as it was carried on a specially adapted Land Rover. While the proceedings are being broadcast live around the world, members of the public won't be able to watch any part of the procession or service in person because of the pandemic. His coffin has emerged from the state entrance of Windsor Castle as those taking part in the ceremonial procession for his funeral take their places. The coffin is being loaded on a specially adapted Land Rover, designed by Philip himself, for the 8-minute journey to St. George's Chapel. Senior military commanders are lined up in front of the vehicle, with members of the royal family following behind. Queen Elizabeth I will ride in a state Bentley at the rear of the procession. Prince William, Duke of Cambridge, Prince Andrew, Duke of York, Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex and Prince Edward, Earl of Wessex during the funeral of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh at Windsor Castle. Photo, Getty Images. In the spring sunshine, some locals stopped outside the castle to leave flowers on Saturday, but people largely heeded requests by police in the palace not to gather because of the coronavirus pandemic. The entire procession and funeral will take place out of public view within the grounds of the castle, a 950-year-old royal residence 20 miles 30 kilometers west of London. It will be shown live on television. Philip's coffin was moved from the royal family's private chapel to the castle's inner hall on Saturday morning to rest until the mid-afternoon funeral procession. The coffin was draped in Philip's personal standard, and topped with his Royal Navy cap and sword and a wreath of flowers. The funeral will reflect Philip's military ties, both as a ceremonial commander of many units and as a veteran of war. More than 700 military personnel are taking part, including army bands, Royal Marine buglers and an honor guard drawn from across the armed forces. Those marching into place included soldiers of the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery, who were firing a gun salute, guards regiments in scarlet tunics and bearskin hats, Highlanders in kilts and sailors in white naval hats. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh's coffin covered with His Royal Highness's personal standard is carried by a bearer party found by the Royal Marines on the west steps of Windsor Castle. Photo, Getty Images. Philip was deeply involved in the funeral planning, and aspects of it reflect his personality, including his love of the rugged Land Rover. Philip drove several versions of the four-wheel drive vehicle for decades until he was forced to give up his license at 97 after a crash. His body will be carried to the chapel on a modified Land Rover Defender that he designed himself. The children of Philip and the Queen, heir to the throne Prince Charles, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward, will walk behind the hearse, while the 94-year-old Queen will travel to the chapel in a Bentley car. Grandsons Prince William and Prince Harry will also walk behind the coffin, although not side by side. The brothers, whose relationship has been strained amid Harry's decision to quit royal duties and move to California, will flank their cousin Peter Phillips, the son of Princess Anne. The moment is likely to stir memories of the image of William and Harry at 15 and 12, walking behind their mother Princess Diana's coffin in 1997, accompanied by their grandfather Philip, in a London ceremony televised around the world. The Foot Guards Band march on Injun Court ahead of the funeral of Britain Prince Philip's funeral at Windsor Castle. A Pifito Armed Forces bands played hymns and classical music before the funeral service, which was being preceded by a nationwide minute of silence. Inside the Gothic chapel, the setting for centuries of royal weddings and funerals, the service was to be simple and somber. There will be no sermon, at Philip's request, and no family eulogies or readings, in keeping with royal tradition. But Dean of Windsor David Connor will say the country has been enriched by Philip's unwavering loyalty to our Queen, by his service to the nation and the Commonwealth, by his courage, fortitude and faith. Philip spent almost 14 years in the Royal Navy and saw action in the Mediterranean Sea, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific during World War I. Several elements of his funeral have a maritime theme, including the hymn Eternal Father, Strong to Save, which is associated with seafarers and asks God, "O hear us when we cry to thee" for those in peril on the sea. As Philip's coffin is lowered into the royal vault, Royal Marine buglers will sound action stations, an alarm that alerts sailors to prepare for battle, a personal request from Philip. Former Bishop of London Richard Chartres, who knew Philip well, said the prince was a man of faith, but liked things kept succinct. Maltese Navy officers hold a picture of Prince Philip outside his old residence, Villa Gardamangia in Pita in Valletta, Malta. A P photo, he was at home with Broad Church, High Church and Low Church, but what he really liked was Short Church, Chartres told the BBC. I always remember preaching on occasions which he was principal actor that the instruction would always come down, I no more than 4 minutes. Along with Philip's children and grandchildren, the 30 funeral guests include other senior royals and several of his German relatives. Philip was born a Prince of Greece and Denmark and, like the Queen, is related to a thicket of European royal families. Mourners have been instructed to wear masks and observe social distancing inside the chapel, and not to join in when a 4-person choir sings hymns. The Queen, who has spent much of the past year isolating with her husband at Windsor Castle, will sit alone. Queen Elizabeth I arrives for the funeral of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh at Windsor Castle. Photo, Getty Images. Ahead of the funeral, Buckingham Palace released a photo of the Queen and Philip, smiling and relaxing on blankets in the grass in the Scottish Highlands in 2003. The palace said the casual photo was a favourite of the Queen. For decades, Philip was a fixture of British life, renowned for his founding of the Duke of Edinburgh's Awards Youth Programme and for a blunt-spoken manner that at times included downright offensive remarks. He lived in his wife's shadow, but his death has sparked a reflection about his role, a new appreciation from many in Britain. He was a character, an absolute character, said Jenny Jeeves as she looked at the floral tributes in Windsor. Just a wonderful husband, father and grandfather, and a good example to all of us, really.